Welcome to another episode of Comedy Wham Presents with me, your host Valerie, and sometime kitty co-hosts Miss Purrington and Mookie. ComedyWham.com is your place to go for features about all Austin comedy. In addition to podcasts, Comedy Wham brings you articles, album reviews, our advice column, all of my Austin Chronicle articles about the Austin comedy scene, and you can check out our listing of festivals from across the country and the world, and our FPIA contest page tracks the history of the contest. Our most popular feature is our events page for live comedy shows in Austin, Houston, and DFW, where 100% of the entries you see come from comics and producers. Click the Submit a Show button from the top of the homepage or events page to fill out the survey to get your show listed. It's free and easy. Tag us on your Instagram stories and we'll share your show to our followers, and we also offer some paid promo boosts for your shows on Instagram. Want to support these resources we provide? You can donate to Comedy Wham on PayPal, Venmo, or even Patreon. Click the Support CW icon on our homepage to see the ways that you can help us. Our podcast was launched in 2016 to bring you funny people and their stories. As a fan, I like to delve into a comic's background and motivations, and will usually take a detour along the way. Consider the interview a way for you to get to know the folks that make the Austin comedy scene one of the best in the country. If you like this podcast, please rate and review us. Today, I'm talking to somebody who's got one of those names, possible to search online. But what I do know is he does comedy and he's a musician. He is also known as Necromancer Nick on the Good Evening News.
That's me.
It's a show every Tuesday at Sunset Strip. He hosts a monthly show that competes with our monthly show on the first Wednesdays at Craft Brewery.
Oh, no.
Completely opposite sides of the city, so it's okay, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's actually, it's called Craft Comedy Show. It's at Batch, which is, it's like a brewery and coffee shop.
Yeah. Sorry, not Craft Brewery. Yeah.
Well, it is a craft brewery, so you're on the right page there.
And speaking of wordplay, as I always do, I always scour somebody's social media as I'm getting ready for the show, and I don't know, I think he may have written the most perfect tweet I've ever seen. From, I don't know if you remember this one, November 16th, 2023. The tweet, all it says is, Diarrhea Van Frank. And now Comedy Wham presents our guest, Nick Cox. Okay, explain the tweet.
I don't think there's really much.
Yeah, there's not much.
It's one of those thoughts that you have, though, where you're like, all right, there's no, like, actual joke for me to ever say here, but you have a line, and you're like, I gotta write that down somewhere.
And I kept staring at it, and I'm like, wait a minute, what? And then I sounded it out, and I'm like, oh my God. So dumb. But I like dumb things. I mean, you're Necromancer Nick, so.
Yeah. Well, also, it's like, so I also do, every week at the Creek on Sunday nights, I'm on the Banana Phone panel.
Oh, okay.
So it's like me and Candace Medina and Jack Tim. There's a bunch of us. There's Michael Ridley and Nick V and Dane Lyon. There's a whole bunch of people, but it's just dumb jokes the entire time. So it's like a roast heckle mic is the idea. So people go up and they do a short set, and then there's a panel of us with microphones, and then the whole audience, we can all just yell and say whatever we want to them at a certain point. So a lot of it is dumb wordplay jokes and stuff like that. So yeah, I have a soft spot for sure.
Yeah. Nick, I like to start with an official icebreaker question, if you're ready. Mm-hmm. One word to describe your past.
One word to describe my past. Meandering. Is that, yeah. I feel like I've had a lot of I feel like the last 10 years specifically for me have been, I feel like everything was kind of the same for a while. And then the last like 10, 12 years, a lot of changes, a lot of time, like moving a lot, like you mentioned music stuff, like prior to comedy, like that was my whole life.
Yeah.
So like touring in bands and that being like what my whole identity sort of was built around.
Oh, wow. It was that extent.
Yeah. That was just all I ever did.
Yeah.
And then comedy, and then I I moved to another country for a year, and then I moved to Nashville, and then moved down here, and there's just been a lot of, relationships, things like that. There's just been a lot of chapters in there.
Well, this might be a dumb question. The answer might be quite obvious to those that know you, but which came first, your love of comedy or music?
Music. Well, I that's kind of hard to say, though, because it's like, I think I always liked telling jokes and stuff. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's certain, but I don't think I put anything together as far as like trying to do stand up or anything.
Yeah.
I always wanted to be funny as a kid, I guess. But yes, I played. I started playing guitar when I was 11.
Okay, that's pretty young.
Yeah, so I've sort of been I certainly had more experience trying to actually make music years and years before I ever did with comedy.
Is Tennessee where you're originally from?
Yeah, I'm originally from Memphis.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So huge country, huge music scene in Tennessee in general.
Yeah.
Between Memphis and Nashville.
Yeah. Although all the music I ever played, it was never like what that city is known for.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I never played, Memphis has a history of between Stax and then a lot of early on blues music and then early rock and roll stuff, comes from Sun Studios and everything. That I was always in heavy bands and aggressive, noisy, annoying things,
know. But you're very careful not to say metal.
Sometimes it could be described as that, but it's I think it could definitely be described as that, but I think that a lot of times when people hear metal, they imagine really fast, really like shreddy guitar solos type stuff. It was more how can we be? There was several different bands, but for the most part, they were still a lot of those things, but while being slow and stuff, and just kind of a different way of approaching it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So playing guitar, probably doing the garage band kind of deal when you were a teenager.
Yeah.
And
until I was not even just until I was 26. Yeah. So it went almost 27. So it went for a long time.
Yeah.
It wasn't my band, the band that was the one I was in the longest. The last show we played a big last show. It was 2018. But yeah, from starting to go see shows all the time when I was 13 until 26. It was kind of that was all music.
So what was your why did that chapter come to an end for you?
Well, so I had started doing comedy when I was probably 24.
Okay.
5. Something like that. I had sort of had on and off again starts and stops and stuff. So I had other interests that I was pursuing, and then the guitarist in my band, he's a little older, and he had a kid and stuff around that point in time, and so it was just clear that it wasn't something that it was still something I totally would have done if I was still living there, but the girl I was dating at the time, she had a thing where she was going to move to Columbia.
Okay.
And it was just sort of, she was like, "Do you want to come too?" And I was I kind of took stock of, I was like, well, that sounds like a cool opportunity. And I was like, well, I sort of talked to the other guys about, I was like, hey, what if we just called it? And we were all like, yeah, that seems like a nice, there was no upset anything. We're we're breaking up the band. It was just sort of hey, this kind of would make sense if we stop now, right? And we're okay, yeah. So I'm still super close with those guys, and
the biopic is gonna suck.
Okay. There's no drama around it. But those guys, they're still in a band. If anyone likes heavy music, those guys are in another band now that I was also briefly in for a minute called Autolith. Listen to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let's rewind to before the completely unceremonious end of your band to what was it that made you start comedy?
So there were a few things. There was so in the thing that made me want to try to do it, which I then didn't do for I don't know how many years, for several years, was I always was like interested in the idea of comedy, but
Yeah.
then that movie, Funny People, the Judd Apatow movie from like 2009. I guess I would have been a senior in high school when that came out. And I remember like not even so much being obsessed with the movie itself, but that I didn't really know anything about, the idea of open mics, stuff like that.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot. There's no comedy club in Memphis.
Oh, really?
There is sort of now and stuff, but there wasn't when I was growing up. There was no like normal place where like you'd go see a headliner. You know what I mean? So I just had no real exposure to that world. But I always had thought that like something like making movies or something would be cool. Like I was obsessed with like I like the idea of creating something and trying to be funny before I really had any concept of what the world of stand-up was. Like when the movie, I had the movie Clerks on like a box set on DVD. And so one disc was the movie and then the other disc was a documentary about the making of the movie.
Okay.
And I was like, it fit right in line with like the like coming from like DIY music stuff to like DIY movies. And then whenever I found out that there's like that open mics are like
Basically.
that's all stand up is DIY.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And I was like, oh, that seems like it's in the same like a world that I at least can kind of fathom.
Yeah.
So that movie put it in my head a little bit. But then there was no club and it was only like bar shows and stuff in Memphis. So whenever it was actually I didn't even get around to doing it until I graduated college. And then I was just like, it'd be cool to try it. So I would do some open mics and stuff. And then that was really, there were a few bar shows here and there kind of thing, but that's sort of how I started. And then I was moving back and forth to New York for a little bit for sort of unrelated stuff. So I was sort of doing comedy for my first couple of years. I would like dip my toes in and back out kind of thing. But yeah, it was a lot of like stop start, but I was always like, I knew I wanted to make something and that comedy seemed like there's the least barrier for entry, at least stand up. Like you just sort of like, you don't have to schedule people. You just have to show up and talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did that first experience go?
It was actually, so there used to be a bar called the P&H in Memphis that it was like it was like the diviest of dive bars. And like Craig Brewer his first movie, the guy who made like Hustle and Flow, he's a director from Memphis. His first movie is called The Poor and Hungry. And it's like kind of, that bar was central to that movie.
Interesting.
So they had an open mic, and before I even started stand-up, I would just go there because I was like, oh, I want to see comedy, and there's no club. So this open mic would be on Thursday nights, and it would be packed. Like,
Wow.
I mean, like the first time I did stand-up, there probably were at least 60, 70 people in the room, something like that.
Wow.
And it was like a bar crowd, so you could lose them to the point where they're just not even straight up not listening to you. But like if you caught them like early enough that they still like cared, it was great. So I got really lucky my first time because I was so afraid and I was so type A about it that I went and I was doing like a Stephen Wright impression basically. I was doing like one-liners that were all they were terrible. But because the host Tommy Oler, he brought me up with the caveat of it's his first time doing comedy, so like anytime they knew when they were supposed to laugh and they were trying to be supportive, so like it was pretty gentle as far as first times can go. Yeah. It took me probably like a few weeks until I sort of started to deviate and I tried to tell a story. I told like a long story at some other open mic, and I just remember it was also I went to this other open mic, and it was first time I'd been there, and it was just comics. So the first time I experienced that. And I told a story, which is also stupid to do in front of just comics, even still. And I told one long story and just got people just blankly stared at me for 5 straight minutes. And then I was like, all right, fuck, okay, how do I figure this out? So that was my...
You play guitar in a band, so I guess you're not the lead singer where like being a showboat is kind of that part of the deal.
Well, I played guitar and bass in different bands, but I almost always was also the singer.
Okay.
Yeah.
But still being on the stage doing comedy.
Super different. So I couldn't be any more different.
Yeah.
It's not until more recently with Good Evening that I've even combined any of those at all, which it still is not anything like it was before. But like with comedy, like it's almost like so with music, there's a lot of things. So certainly with the music I was playing, it was like, we're gonna be so loud that this is the only thing that you can do, and you can't really be in a room and like ignore it, you know.
Yeah.
So I was like, they might stop listening, because that was a real threat. It's like certain rooms, you know, you do like bar shows and stuff where it's like you're not only having to think about how to be funny, you're also having to think about like, how do I make sure they don't just like all turn around in their seats and just start having a conversation. So I was really afraid of that, because I had been to that open mic enough times to see that happen. And then I'd never gone on stage alone. So
that's true.
So it's so different. Like if you're like tanking a set, you're at least tanking a set with like your friends, you know?
Yeah.
And also like with music, if you like, it's almost like the difference between like a comedy movie versus a drama, where it's like a drama, they're like, this is the movie I went, maybe you don't like it, maybe you do, but it's all sort of ambiguous. But with comedy, it's like everyone knows what reaction you're trying to get out of them at a given point. So it's like, if you fail, everyone knows it.
Yeah.
And then with music too, if you play a song and they don't like it, it's still a song.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you played it, you know, maybe it's not their thing, but if you played it correctly and you know that, you're like, well, I did what I came here to do. But with comedy, it's like, if you tell a joke and nobody laughs, you're like, actually, they might be right. That might not be a joke. Yeah. So it felt so vulnerable. I was like, the bar had it was like kind of two separate rooms joined by the actual bar. And the front room was where the comedy would be. And then the back room, there was like pool tables and dartboards and stuff. And I just remember pacing around that back room and then walking, like, the host came up to me, he's like, hey, you're on in 2 people or whatever. And I remember like pacing for a minute and then walking out the back door, walking all the way to my car, because I'm like, I'm leaving. And then walking all the way back in, standing up there because I was like, I'm going to throw up. And it's so funny in retrospect, because it's like all that to go up in front of like 60 people and then just be like, you know, whatever dumb dick joke or something it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so silly to think of in retrospect, but yeah, it was
well,
like
in retrospect, but you know,
you have nothing to compare it to.
Yeah.
Everything is scary if it's the first time you've ever experienced it, I guess.
Yeah. So you stuck around Memphis for a while and kept doing that bar show or the other bar show?
Pretty much. Yeah, like I said, so like I was back and forth to New York a little bit, and I would do, when I was there, I did like so I was just outside of the city, so I would I would go into the city on like weekends, but I wasn't really even there. I sort of already had that charted out before I started stand-up. Because I had a family member there who like had a restaurant, and he was like, you're not doing anything, do you want to come work at my restaurant and then just go hang out in the city and see if you want to. So I was like, okay. And I did like improv classes and stuff in the city, so that was cool to get to, you know, sort of figure out like other comedy skills, I guess. And then and then eventually I came back to Memphis. I was there for like a year, and then and then I moved to Columbia, and so that would have been 2018, and I haven't been back since then.
Okay.
I mean, I've been back, but I haven't lived there since then.
Yeah. Is there a comedy scene in Columbia?
It actually was kind of interesting. There is a Spanish speaking. There's because I lived in Medellin, which is it's like 4 million people, 4.5 million.
Okay.
So it's a really big city, and there's a lot of Spanish speaking comedy. And there were enough expats and tourists from Europe and various places that there were a couple of places. There was one bar that would do like an English comedy night once every like month. I didn't know about it until I'd already been there for a few months, but me and my ex, who she's a comic too, we were like the only people there who like, so they put us on all of them after the first time we went, because they were like, other people, it's just like tourists doing an open mic who had never done it before. And then
yeah.
so we showed up and we were still bad, but they were like, do you want to do half, 25 minutes? Because it was because it was with the people who had any time.
Yeah.
So I was I was like, I think maybe I'm incredible at this. And the handful of times I did it while I was there, which I was, and then I moved back to the U.S. and did comedy for people who saw English comedy ever, and then turns out I was not.
No. Did you try to change your comedy at all? Being because I always go back to when you do comedy in different places, just even across the country, you're going to get different audiences, let alone going to a different country. Or were you so early in your comedy career that you didn't even think, oh yeah, I should probably change how I approach?
Well, my weird thing too is I knew enough to know certain things, but then there was other stuff that I wouldn't even I would be in the middle of, like I said, when they would give me way more time than I should have had. So I end up kind of talking through premises, but it's one of those where if I would have sat down and thought about it, I would be like, oh, they don't know who Stone Cold Steve Austin is or whatever I was talking about.
Yeah.
And and also in a lot of places everyone knows who Stone Cold Steve Austin is, but it's but you know what I mean? There was probably some references and stuff, but I think at that point I was there were so many things that were probably wrong with my set that the references were just one part of it. There were cultural differences though. I remember one time I did that expat show, and you would get a very different group. So sometimes it'd be a lot of American tourists or people who were spending, a few months there, and sometimes it would be Europeans and stuff, and then sometimes it would be just a bunch of Colombians who could speak English, but maybe not well enough to understand jokes in it. Certainly not enough to understand really shitty jokes in it.
You're very confident in your.
Well, I mean, at this point, I've been doing stand. I was so green, and they were giving me way more time than I deserved, just because no one else had any. So yeah, I remember going up one time, and there was this big group of guys up front, and they clearly weren't Colombian, so we didn't know. We were oh, maybe American, some business thing or something. It was 10 guys, right in the front, this big table, and no one's getting them. They're smiling and they look like they're enjoying it, but just they're not laughing.
Yeah.
And I did myself. I tried so hard, whatever that looked like at the time, I don't know. But I remember being come on. And at the end of this, and just never getting him. And at the end of the set, I was well, whatever. And then this guy comes up to me, he's like, well, your set was so great. We thought you were so funny. And I was like, oh, you guys are German and you just don't laugh out loud.
There you go.
It was such a weird.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's that was my first time being oh, okay, there's differences there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was just in Toronto 2 weeks ago, and featuring for someone there, and it's so weird because you might as well be in any U.S. city for 99% of the things that happen there.
Yeah.
But then I was doing a bit that references some gun stuff, and then I just realized I was a minute into this bit, and then I could just see that people were just sort of they were polite and was sitting through it, and then I was wait, does anyone here, have any of you guys ever been around a handgun? And that none of them had.
Yeah.
And I was there were 90 people in the room, and 0 people had ever had any, and I was oh, okay, that's I'll think about that now.
Yeah. Well, and then they probably kind of know that the American comics are going to, bring certain things.
Yeah, but they're not desensitized to it. So I was making light of gun violence. And not it wasn't
always
super
a crowd
edgelord.
pleaser.
Yeah, it wasn't super edgelord stuff or anything, but it was just little silly stuff. I just mentioned guns, and because it was a true thing. I was talking about how someone I was dating had a gun in it, but wasn't anything crazy. Mm-hmm. And they just sort of were there was this kind of hush that fell over the room, and I'm what are you guys doing? Oh, you've never been around a gun, so you assume that they had it because they wanted to murder me. Yeah, but.
Okay, so you come back from Colombia after about a year, and you go back to Memphis.
when I first got back, I moved straight to Nashville.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
different music scene now.
Yeah, different and
little
and a
bit-
much
and-
bigger comedy scene.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah. There were more comics, and there was at the time. I mean, there are a few comedy clubs in Nashville. So at the time, there was Zanies, and there used to be Comedy Bar. There's Comedy Bar in Chicago, and at the time they had a sister location in Nashville, and then there's a place called Third Coast. But for the most part, it was like anywhere with a lot of brewery shows and stuff like that. But it was at least cool to. The big difference for me was seeing professional comedians that I never really had.
Yeah.
Because they just didn't come through where I was at.
Yeah,
So,
now the training program part can start
yeah.
for you.
Yeah. So it was like I was there and I would just, because Zanies was cool and they would just let comics in if it wasn't sold out. So like I would just go and I would see. Also, it's important that, so at the beginning, I moved there like mid 2019.
Okay.
So at the beginning, I could get into those things and stuff, but during COVID, everything else shut down. And Zanies went to like half capacity, but they went to 7 days a week. They were like four or 5 days a week before that because none of the comics were on the road anymore. Mm-hmm. So like Nate Bargatze and Dusty Slay already lived in Nashville.
Yeah.
Then Theo Vaughn moved there and stuff. So I would go to like what was supposed to be like a local showcase on a Monday, and I would see Nate Bargatze do 40 minutes like with note cards, like working stuff out. So that was really cool to get to like see the strings on a level I had never seen before. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I was there until mid 2021 when I moved here.
Okay.
Yeah.
And given with Theo, Nate, I think Leanne is in that area too. With that kind of star power, why Austin?
Well, Nashville is like the like Zanies is a phenomenal club. Mm-hmm. By the time I was leaving there, the Comedy Bar was already like on its way out, and it wasn't that wasn't a sticking point to stay or anything. Yeah. And I would do it every now and then, like little showcases and stuff. But Zanies just they don't need a ton of local comics. Yeah. And they've opened up a little more to more locals since then because since that all happened, like people started touring again. So 4 or 5 spots a show are not taken up by like headliners. Yeah. But yeah, I would be at Zanies shows and stuff, but I wasn't getting booked by Zanies. And then other than that, it was just, it was like any other smaller scene beyond those points where it was a lot of like brewery shows and stuff that were really good. It was just, yeah. And so me and the comic I was dating at the time, we decided to, we were like, okay, well, she no longer had to be there for work. And a friend of ours, Lee Kimbrell, he's a comic in Cincinnati. He was in Nashville all the time because he opened up for a few different comics, and he would just end up coming through like all the time. So I knew him, and he had just been down here. And he was like, "Oh, I'm just about to move down there. It's so sick. It's so fun. You guys got to go." So we came and visited, and we're like, "Oh, this place is sick." Texting Lee, he's like, "Oh, I'm going to be down there in 2 weeks." We moved down here, and he never even came. Oh. Which was
switch.
Yeah, but he's still at least cool. Yeah, it was just I moved down here and I saw so many people that like I already had a few friends from Nashville too who had moved down here. Mm-hmm. Like my friend Matt Boyd had already moved down here. I knew Lucas McCrary and Darian Irwin and Trey Pack and stuff from Tennessee. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I already had some people it didn't feel too unapproachable.
Yeah.
And yeah, I came down here and it was like, oh, there's like. I remember going to like certainly before 15 clubs opened up, like they did in the last year and a half. Yeah. Like whenever I came down here, it was just Cap City was still closed, so it was only the Creek really, and like Vulcan, I guess. Maybe the Velve had just reopened or something. Yeah. But it was mostly just those places, and then like going to like Lucas's shows and stuff, and just very like other people I know too who are just having random indie shows that you go and you're like, there are 200 people here. What's happening?
Crazy, yeah.
And it just felt sort of like a little bit of a gold rush, but also more so than like being opportunistic. It just kind of felt like inspiring. It was like, oh, there's all these people coming and they're all just like generally positive. It felt like a good vibe to be around.
Yeah.
So
I'm curious, at what point did you make the decision? Like, you were in Memphis, pretty decent scene. You're able to watch, impressive comics on a regular basis. At what point did you realize, I kind of want to make this a career or, big part of my life. So I need to like train. I need to, go to a New York, go to an LA, and, as it so happens, the hottest scene in the country, Austin.
mm-hmm.
What point did you make that kind of decision that I want to chase this?
I've always been bad at fully committing to things, so who knows if that's ever even happened. But I know that there was a point, an initial thought for me where I wasn't like, oh, just thinking about it as like a hobby. I was kind of back, like I said, I was kind of back and forth to New York for a little bit.
Yeah. And
the last time I was there was early 2017. And because I was doing an open mic. So I was doing an open mic at the end of 2016 in Nyack, New York. And I met a guy who was, we were just like watching basketball on TV. And I was obsessed. I'm a huge Memphis Grizzlies fan. And I was obsessed with the NBA. I still love the NBA. But I was like, I watched basketball every day at that point. And like I could like name like the starting five of every team and knew everyone. I was just like super. Jeez. I didn't have a lot going on, so I had a lot of extra time to just know basketball stats. And so I was talking to this guy at the show at this open mic, and afterwards he was like, yeah, it's cool that you that you like have all that basketball knowledge. I'm actually a manager at NBA Entertainment, which is in Secaucus, New Jersey, so not far from there. He was like, yeah, I've been there for like 15 years. He's like, if you want to give me your email, I'll let you know if anything opens up. And a few months later, something like opened up. So he emailed me, and I had already moved back down to Memphis, and I thought I was just there now.
Yeah.
I was at this is sort of a tangent, sorry, but but I remember I was at it was right before Christmas, and I was working a catering company at the time. I had like nothing going on. I was working this shitty catering company. I had to get there like 5 a.m. all the time. And it was right before Christmas. We went to this office complex. And this is all very, within 15 minutes, 20 minutes of like where I grew up. So we're at this office complex because this whole complex had rented out was using the catering company I work for to cater like a Christmas breakfast for all these people. And I would like see people coming in that I went to high school with. And I was like, fuck this. And they tried to make us wear elf hats.
Oh boy.
And I like Santa hats, and I was like, I'm not fucking doing it. And like, you got to do it. And I was like, you'll have over my goddamn dead body. I was like having like this crisis. I was like, you don't understand. If I put this hat on, I'll kill myself. And when that was happening, like during that shift or that breakfast, I got the email from that guy, I see the notification on my phone, and I just like walked out and bailed, and was just like, see ya, and I just left. And so I did that, and then I went there and I did that job for a few months, and it was cool, but everyone else who was there, it was their like life had led them to that point, like it was like their dream.
Yeah. And
it was like a low paying job, and like you could climb up in it and everything, but it was like everyone else who was there, they were like, a lot of them like D1 college basketball players, or like even or D2 or whatever. They had dedicated their lives to that.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they were like, "This is my thing," and I was just sort of a guy who just sort of ended up there. And I remember they asked me, because they when the playoffs start, they like wave like it's in the NBA. They lay off most of the people. And the next season, I got an email and they're like, "Do you want to start? You want to work this season too?" And I remember having this sort of thought where I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna have to like zig or zag here a little bit because it was at mostly nights because you're working like when there are games."
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember that was when I had the thought where I was like, "Okay, I need to like, I guess, make a decision here because I thought that was my dream job. Turns out it's not." And then I'm doing this other thing here that is more fun. So that, I guess, sort of would have been the point where I was like, okay, I need to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you come to Austin
Mm-hmm.
and checking time. Let's do our little game. We're
Okay.
going to do our little intermission here. So this is, sorry, that was a very rough transition.
You're good.
So this is Where Should We Begin? It's a card game with open-ended questions, and my web guru Richard gave me this as a gift. And so you are going to point to one of these two cards, and I will read that one to you after you read the other one to me. So pick one of the two cards, okay? So I will read that one to you after you read that one to me, and we'll just see where it goes. We'll work on our improv.
If I could whisper something in the ear of my younger self, I would say...
Don't wait. That's
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's the best one.
Don't wait.
Yeah.
I came to this, even just this comedy fandom, like pretty late. If I had done it sooner, many things would be different.
Yeah. I hear that for sure.
So that was an easy one.
Yeah.
All right, let's see what yours is like. All right, Nick, I wish everyone would forget about the time that I... ...
I don't know. I've done a lot of embarrassing things, but most of them I've done like deliberately in front of a lot of people. So it's really hard for me to be like, "Hey, can you forget about the time I did that on stage in front of you on purpose?" It's kind of hard.
Yeah, you kind of have a prominent video on. I've saw it on YouTube. I can't remember. Are you on TikTok? Did I see it on TikTok?
Maybe.
And it's you in what looks like a diaper.
I mean, it looks like it because it is. Yeah. I initially felt weird about that. Now enough time has passed. Like, so I did this character. So at first, Good Evening News is at Sunset now. At first, it was at the Creek, like for a few months there, and like 2 years ago. So is the character? It is not. There's no reason or backstory to any of it. I just thought it would be funny to go on stage in a diaper, and I guess just because of alliteration, just a diaper, like a baby with a Boston accent. So, and I'm not even particularly good at a Boston accent, but I think maybe there was something topical at the time that made it make sense. I don't remember anymore, but I know that I went up in a diaper on Good Evening a couple times, and we thought it was funny. And then like a year later, actually the first one might have only been a few months later, Casey Rocket was doing until recently, Casey Rocket always did monthly headlining shows at the Creek. And so a lot of times he would ask me to like, if I did stand up a couple times on it, and then a couple other times he would always do like different character things or silly, like, basically sort of sketches, I guess, at the beginning or middle of the show, stuff like that. So I would do those things, and he asked me to do the baby thing. So the first time I did it, I went out but I still had like, I was wearing a diaper, but I also had like boots and a shirt and everything else on. And then, and it was funny, it was fine. But then like at this point, it's probably been about a year and a half ago, he asked me again to do it, and I thought that it would be, I was like, I'm not going to half-ass it this time. So I didn't wear anything. I wasn't even wearing shoes. Like, it was just me in a diaper. And the reason I made it, like, that isn't why he asked me to do it, but it just coincidentally right before that was when the Celtics had lost in the finals. So I had, took green paint and painted like a Larry Bird. Basically, I painted like Larry Bird numbers and Celtics on my chest and stuff. Yeah, then I just went up there and I like chugged 2 beers on stage and just kind of like riffed. I had like 3 jokes, and then I was thinking about, I always like remember it as being like 3 minutes long. And then I watched a video recently, and it was like 8 minutes of just me just being up there in a diaper, like dancing. At one point, I like crouch, and to the point where I'm like, oh my god, how did it not? It wasn't a real diaper. I went because I'm lazy and I procrastinate, and like I was like, oh, I'll go buy a diaper. It turns out like diaper technology has come a long way. Most diapers that you go get that are made for adults like kind of just look like underwear. So I was like, that's not going to work. So I had to go to Walmart and get fabric and like sort of make it. And I'm not good at it. So the whole time I was like, man, there's some duct tape underneath this and some safety pins that are doing a lot of work right now. Yeah. So it's embarrassing, but I don't know that I wish everyone forgot about the time. Although there was a weird period where, because there were like 180 something people at that second time.
Oh, wow.
And I do remember there was a little period where I was like, oh, that's the only way you know me? Like about a bunch of people. I remember like signing up for the mothership mic like right after it started, and they were like, well, you should, you can do the baby on it. I was like,
no.
What? I was like, of course not. What are you talking about? So there was a little window there where I felt like, oh my God, am I going to be trapped by this? But yeah, but then it turns out that the secret is just to do so many other dumb things that they sort of forget about it.
Yeah. So the Good Evening News, you're not one of the official hosts, is that?
Yeah, I'm like the third mic. Like if like on like Letterman had like, I'm like Paul Schaefer.
Okay.
Is that the way I try to think? So yeah, so it's Jack and Mikey that actually host it. Jack does most of like the actual booking of the show and everything. And then, I just sort of weaseled my way into it. I was just always on it at the first batch doing different characters. And then when it first started at Sunset, I was doing different characters in different segments every week. And then I saw The Cure at Moody Center last year. And so then right after I saw The Cure, the next day I went out and I bought a synth, and I did Robert Smith hair and makeup, and I just like, and I do not know how to play synthesizer, but I knew how to play the beginning of the song Disintegration, the da 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 da, and so I just kept playing people on and off to that, and then just dancing, and then just going away, and I thought it was funny, and then in that like the face paint started changing, and then for a little bit, and then Mikey was the one who said Necromancer Nick, and then I just eventually was like, oh, I can play guitar, so I'll bring that up here. And then it's just, then it just sort of became every week.
That's cool. So it was almost a fluke that I happened to see Necromancer Nick.
Maybe. I mean, it's like but I'm on it every time now. Like I get a third mic, and the cool thing is I don't really have to do anything, but it's just nice to, especially like because on Good Evening News, it's kind of like a character open mic, sort of like it's a news show in theory. In reality, it's mostly people going up there with like a half-baked bit that they're trying for the first time. Certainly everyone on there is doing those bits for the first time and the only time. So sometimes, just you haven't had a chance to workshop it. It just doesn't work. And a lot of what I do is just like, if it's not landing or whatever, just making another little joke and just lightening up everything. Yeah. And then playing people on and off stage with guitar.
Okay. Are you familiar with Dave Hill?
The
comic, not the musician.
Yeah.
Okay. So are you familiar with his Witch Taint?
No.
Like little side project?
No.
That was, he hasn't done it in a long time. He would bring that to Austin for South by Southwest. And it's kind of like a mock band, but full makeup. And
Hell yeah.
Phil on, no, that was a different project. Metal Grasshopper was a video series he had with Phil Anselmo.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of the things that you've been talking to me, I've just been waiting to say, look, Dave Hill.
Yeah. I wasn't aware of him until recently, and I saw something of him like with like a guitar and stuff too, and I was like, it was just interesting because it's like, you see like someone who's like playing guitar seems to have somewhat of a similar sensibility, and you're like, oh, I didn't know there was another guy like that.
And he really incorporates. He's a multi-hyphenate, so he's written books. He does comedy. He has like legit bands on his own. So I'm like, oh, you're kind of on a trajectory there that if you wanted to go back to a band, you could do that.
I still am in a band. Like I still play music. It's just not like the focus of my life like it was at one point.
Yeah.
There were a few years there where I didn't play music at all, and it wasn't in a band, and like, not to sound like corny, but it's something that I had always, like, since being 16 or so, like I was just sort of always in bands. So then there was like this gap where whenever I first wasn't in a band, I had like a couple months later, I had like a meltdown because it was like, and then I realized I was like, oh, even if I'm not doing it a lot, I have to play a little bit to like regulate something. I don't know.
Yeah. Like my son is a competitive swimmer, and he's in college now. And I think probably after college, because he swam, I don't know, for 10 years leading up to graduation, and then now he's swimming, for at least 4 more years. And I'm like, what's it going to be like for him when, college is done? Yeah. And this big part of his life is gone.
Swim lessons. Yes. It's time to go back to where you started. Yeah. That's tough.
So, I'm a big fan of people that combine, like, musicianship with comedy, or don't, but I think the big message that I would share from what observing, and people would argue I'm a hardcore Dave Hill fan, do whatever it is that you want to do. The world will accept you. The people that love you will accept you, and if you want to do band stuff for a while or merge the two or do comedy, just as long as you're like really, really into what you're doing. Yeah. The fans will follow you.
Yeah, that sounds cool. Like it is cool. Like I for some reason I had until the last year or less probably, I had like some weird block mentally around trying to combine any of the like individual things that I like have done ever. Like with comedy, I was always like pretty dry and pretty, like I would do crazy things like the baby thing or whatever. But my normal stand up was like, I was fine, but it was just jokes, like pretty straightforward. And I played music, but that it was like a keep your peanut butter out of my chocolate kind of thing. Yeah. And so it was like I had all these different things, and like I said, I'd done improv classes and stuff like that, and I would like write scripts and stuff and done sketch, but none of that ever bled into it. So yeah, it has been interesting. It's like somebody pointed it out to me, and they're like, why don't you do any of these together? So I've tried to like, even if it just means like, oh, now I play guitar on Good Evening, or now I like will do more act outs or something like that, because it's like it's like you said, like it's people like it whenever you branch out, and I think that I just had a hard time about I'm doing all the things in their most basic form and not combining any of it, because I never even thought to, because I came to all of them very differently, and they just occupied different spaces in my brain, I guess. Yeah, that would be Dave. I mean, shouts out Dave Hill, I'm coming for you.
Oh no. Well, you better start writing the book. And he's an actor, so yeah, he does.
Fuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, no, I'm gonna be in a short film here soon.
Oh, cool.
Actually, former stand-up comic Matt Boyd, who was one of the comics from Nashville who moved down here that I knew. He stopped doing stand-up around a year ago, but he's making a movie right now, and it's all comics in it, so that'll be cool. Yeah. A little short. That'll be out. Very cool. Hopefully early next year at some point.
Yeah, well, I guess you are coming for Dave Hill.
Yeah, dude, Yikes. Look out, Dave. Yikes. I'm going to have 4 lines and you're over.
Yeah. Okay. So you also have this other show that competes with my show, so I can't book you on my show.
Unfortunate. I'm sorry.
What else? You got movie coming up?
Yeah, I don't know. I just trying to just trying to stay busy and do stuff.
Yeah.
Trying to do. So I did some sketch stuff like last year with Fuzzy Kilji and Nat Rogachevsky. We did a bunch of sketches. Like, it was called TV Sketch Show. We put out like, the idea was they were going to be like, I think a little bit of like Mr. Show kind of thing, where it's like a bunch of sketches, but we were going to make like whole episodes, you know? Which I guess is a lot of things, but I think ultimately we wanted to try to have them all go into each other. It didn't really come out that way, but yeah, we did a bunch of sketches last year. And then that sort of stopped happening, and I stepped away from trying to do that much. But yeah, right now I'm trying to get more of that going and stuff, trying to get active in those areas again. So
Yeah.
it's really
Improv?
I haven't done improv since I did like the first 3 UCB levels years ago, when that was still a thing in New York, which I think it maybe actually just came back. But
Oh, really? Huh.
yeah, because it was like a whole thing where it disappeared during
Yeah.
the pandemic, and people were
Yeah.
mad that they were like, they talked like no one gets paid at UCB, or they didn't. I don't know what it is now.
Yeah.
But no one would get paid, and then they would. But then, and during the pandemic, when UCB closed, they sold the IP for millions of dollars, and they're like, oh, none of us ever got paid, but the people who like, they still,
Wow.
I don't know, it was a whole thing.
Yikes.
But it was cool doing improv. I don't know, improv games are hard to wrap your mind around a little bit, because stand-up is so cynical and
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
and then you go out there and they're like zip zap zop, and you're like, it's really hard to get past to like let yourself,
Yeah.
be silly in that way, that you're not being like bitchy about like, a bunch of adults playing children's games, essentially.
Yeah. I've actually been taking improv classes, and it is funny because I'm such a student of stand-up. And I'm like,
It's a different headspace.
Yeah, it's like stand-ups are just sad, mean, cynical, negative people. And then you go to improv, and they're all just so happy and supportive. I'm like, this is so weird.
Yeah, it's weird. It's nice though. I mean, it's better. Like it feels weird, but it's also like that's healthier.
Yes.
It's like
Right?
objectively like, oh, they're happy. That
Yeah,
sucks.
yeah.
Like what?
Right.
But yeah, there was a tiny bit of overlap between like I just started stand up by the end of improv. But yeah, it was like, for me, I had a hard time where I was like, even prior to starting stand up and doing the improv, where it was like, I remember my first couple classes, everyone in there, like, certainly at least this is the way it was in New York, where like all the people in early improv classes were like struggling, or people who were trying to get into being like Broadway actors. So there it was like all these people who all they wanted to do was musical theater.
Yeah.
But for some reason, like, their agents were like, well, you might be marketable if we can say you have comedy experience.
Interesting.
So it was like all theater kids, and I'd never done that, and it's like such a different energy.
Yeah.
And I remember I was like, I have to quit this class. I can't fucking do it. I can't handle this. Everyone in here is like, it's like, oh my God, so good to see you. And I'm like, shut the fuck up. Like, I was like a bad vibe for the first couple classes. And then I had to think about it. I was like, well, I'm not getting my money back, which was like all the money I had at the time. I was like, I'm not getting any of that money back. And so I was like, either I just have wasted a ton of money, or I just go in there with like I had to like hype myself up to like a manic state so that I could like go in there and not be like grumpy. But then I had a blast, and I ended up loving it. And I was honestly like, I might go up on stage now and do a 5-minute act out because and get nuts, because I probably do owe some of that to like learning to like be like, well, I'm just gonna choose to be silly right now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's the one thing that I can say, because there's the whole thing that if you do stand up and you do improv and you do acting or sketch, then you're a stronger performer. And I can now see why improvisers who are also stand up comedians are really good, because I think what you learn in improv is any choice is a good choice, and just have fun and be silly, and the people, if you're just kind of riding the wave, people are going to follow you, and there's going to be a payoff.
Yeah, there's something really interesting about people choosing to perform, like certainly when it's improvisational, like and in stand-up when people are like having big act outs, so you can feel that there's at least some degree of improvisation, that like it feels like there's like a meta level almost where, okay, so like initially, like with stand-up, you're hoping that it's like a piano recital, like at its worst, where it's like people are going there and you're like, okay, here's this joke I wrote for you. Do you like it? Every time, kind of. But when there's that like a little bit more of a wild energy in the air, like at an improv show or you know, a stand-up show or during a comic who has some level of like riffing that's going on, it feels like you're all like the audience is laughing at what you say, but they're also laughing at, my mind also made these A to C connections that theirs made. So I understand why they chose that right here. Oh, I can't believe they chose that because my mind would have gone to somewhere different. So it's like they're getting to enjoy it on some other level where they feel like they're going on some ride with you instead of just like watching like a movie.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Which is also why improv, like watching a video of it is usually brutal.
Yes.
Because it's fun. It's fun in the room because we're all experiencing it. But when you watch a video, you're like, why isn't this better?
Yeah. Sorry, improvisers.
And it's just that's the best. Like even like I remember going to see I saw this improv show in New York that was it was at UCB years and years ago, and it was a 2-person scene and they did a half hour. It was a 2-person team because normally it would have been more, but only 2 could show up. It was a weekend team. That's what it always was at UCB. Was they had these big weekend teams, but all the people were like famous or like they were like working actors. So like it was just whoever could make it kind of thing. Yeah. Because it's they're not getting paid. And it was 2 people. And they did a half hour, and it was all these different scenes. And one person stayed like a little boy the whole time, I think. And the other person kept cycling through all these different characters in their life, and then one of them was like death, and it was like poignant at points, and then also it was really, really funny, but it was like this big long ride. And that was the only show that they used to record at UCB, and they put it up on YouTube, and I watched it, and it sucked so bad. It was such a bummer because I'm like, this was magic when it happened. Yeah. This is the most incredible. Like this was, I left feeling like I had seen something that would change the world, and then I watched a recording, and I was like, fuck, oh no.
So now that you've been in Austin for a few years,
about 3 years, yeah.
Do you feel like there's still more to learn about comedy?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, yeah, those never. Yeah, that would be insane if I was just like, I actually know everything.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, no, there's yeah. I feel like for me, it's always I kind of go through phases of like not being able to have anything that I write that like sticks around for a while. Like maybe there's like a couple months where like. And you always try at least a couple new jokes at a time, but then there's sometimes where it's just like, oh, none of these I'm actually feeling like sticking with. And then all of a sudden you write a joke, and then all of a sudden you have a 5-minute, 8-minute, whatever new chunk of material. Yeah. And it's just like, so that hasn't stopped. So that's good. Yeah. So yeah, I feel like I feel like I've made a lot of, like me, like me as a stand-up comic now versus like a year ago, I feel like is pretty dramatically different, in a positive way. Certainly in a more fun way. Yeah. So yeah, and I think a lot of that is due to Austin comedy. Most people from the outside, they only know like the edgelord aspect of it, or like Kill Tony kind of thing, and those are there, and there are a lot of people here that do that, and there's nothing wrong with whatever you're doing, but there's something I think in Austin comedy that people outside don't really realize, which is that it's way like altier than most places. Like if I went on stage at a stand-up comedy show in Nashville in a diaper, everyone would be like, he's disrespecting the form. Like there were like purists and stuff there that it's like, dude, we're just trying to make people, who gives a shit?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the fun thing is that like you have shows with stand-up comics that are doing stuff that in other scenes that you'd only see people who do sketch or improv doing, you know, like you see like Good Evening News, it's all stand-up comics, but we're doing a variety show. Like that stuff doesn't happen in a lot of places. So I think Austin's inspiring in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
Which it's weird that even how doesn't matter how far away you get from it, there's still like that element of some kind of weirdness, which it maybe isn't. It's not maybe not the slacker version of Austin, but it's there's still something there.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Is there anything we haven't talked about that you want people to know about you?
No, don't know anything. I don't want anyone to know anything about me. No, yeah, I feel pretty good.
Yeah.
We cover stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Very cool. All right. Are you ready for your closing question?
Sure.
Okay. It is one word to describe your future.
Well, I'm going to cheat a little because I'm going to use my one word that I would use to describe it like mentally. Optimistic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, how is that cheating?
Well, I feel like because I feel like it's saying how I feel about my future as opposed to just like if it's saying like bright or something like that. You know?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is a wrap on Comedy Wham Presents. The incredibly difficult to Google, but if you search comedy, it works. Nick Cox. Nick, tell us where we can find you on social media.
Yeah, it's Instagram and all the other ones at just Nick Cox Comedy. Yeah, go to Banana Phone every Sunday night at the Creek in the Cave. Every Tuesday night, come to Good Evening News at Sunset Strip Comedy Club. I would promote my other show, which is every first Wednesday at Batch in East Austin, but there's a conflict, so I'm not promoting that one.
You can.
Yeah, and then hopefully I'm on the road sometime if you're not in Austin around you. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, you were just in Toronto.
Yeah, I go
cool.
I go on the road featuring for Casey Shornima pretty regularly. So that's
very cool.
Yeah.
We had her for just a tiny little bit of time here in Austin.
Yeah.
Before she, hit it big with writing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty cool. Okay. Well, we hope you've enjoyed learning about how Nick got to be the comedic genius that you heard today just as much as I have. This has been Comedy Wham Presents Nick Cox. I'm Valerie, and that's been funny. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.